was truly an angel disguised as a handsome distraction. Once I left the coffee shop, I stopped at the library and picked up the book. I knew I needed to dive into it ASAP, so I wrapped things up at the office and I headed home. I took a hot shower, put on my coziest jammies, ate a light snack, poured a glass of wine, and then lit my candles. I grabbed my journal and a pen. I grabbed my blanket and secured my spot on the couch to dive in. Now, I'll preface this by saying I'm quite sure you're not supposed to plow through this dynamic book in one sitting, but that's pretty much what I did. After a lifetime of not wanting to look at my shadow side, I decided it was time to jump into the deep end head first. There are many exercises Debbie uses to unlock these wounded chambers of our hearts. Here are a few exercises that I dug into. She has you look through pages and pages of trigger words. Some words you may have little to no reaction to. Other words you will have a more immediate reaction to. You might see a word and feel anger, sadness, anxious, scared, threatened. Or you might feel silly, joyful, playful, or happy. She asks you to identify several words that you had a negative response to. My big word was bitch. Yep. The good girl in me, the one that always wanted to be liked, loved, and respected, was so scared of people thinking I was a bitch. Once I got through this exercise, though, I understood that in neglecting and not looking at my bitch, I was also negating my bitch power. How many times can I say bitch? I have a couple more. Future KK was going to do big things in her career and in business, and she couldn't be a doormat. So I needed to own my inner bitch and trust that when I needed to call her forth in moments where I felt weak or disempowered, I would tune into her and channel my inner bitch energy. Thank you, Debbie Ford. I now have a very healthy relationship with this aspect of my personality. In the next exercise, you visualize getting onto a bus, jam-packed with people. It's hot, there's no AC, it's stinky and uncomfortable. You're guided to look at each and every person on that bus. You're asked to describe in detail what they look like, what they smell like, what they sound like. If they're talking, what are they saying? Are they smoking cigarettes or eating? Are there animals on there? Are there screaming babies? You're asked to notice all the things. What things are pulling your attention? What emotions are coming up for you? Are these all strangers, or are some of them people that you know too? You're asked to journal out anything and everything that comes up for you about the people on the bus. Once you get to the end of the exercise, it is revealed to you that, surprise, everyone on that bus is you. Yep. Congrats, babe. You just revealed a whole lot of judgment. Every stereotype, every judgy thought that passed through your mind, first you placed it on that imaginary person. But beyond that, you just revealed a whole lot of judgment about yourself and how you really feel about those very aspects of you. While this revelation can feel icky, there's no shame. It's all just information and data. Now you know a lot more than you did before about deeper layers of self-judgment. Because this whole process starts with judgments you have about other people. But welcome home, friend. This whole freaking journey is about you. Okay, next exercise. Establishing and getting familiar with your higher self, your happy place, and your darkest self and your scary place. You ready to dimension hop? Let's go. Debbie guides you to imagine getting into an elevator and pressing down. I think I pressed 7. So in this part of the exercise, you imagine the doors open, and it's the darkest, dirtiest, scariest place you can imagine. I'm a super visual person, thus my strong clairvoyant gift that I shared in episode 1. So when the elevator doors opened, it was like poof. I had been transported into the bowels of the New York City sanitation tunnels. It was dark, there was water dripping down the walls, it smelled horrible, and the sound was of screeching metal and loud banging noises. I walked for quite a bit, and then I saw a version of me, homeless, filthy dirty, in a dingy hooded sweatshirt and beat-up jeans. I had a torn beanie hat on and no shoes. I even had a mangy dog at my side. So interesting that even in my shadow visions, I've had a dog. I could feel the energy of this version of me, and she was raw, scared, traumatized, almost feral. As I walked by her, she lashed out and tried to bite me. I looked at her and the tears just started flowing out of me. This was a culmination of all the wounded, scared, raw parts of me that had been neglected, forgotten, looked over, and discarded. I wanted to hold her and tell her that she was loved, but she wouldn't let me near her, as she was in pure survival and fight or flight mode. So I walked back to the elevator and pressed the up button. After arriving back from that place, I stopped journaling and just let the tears pour out. Okay, let's all take another deep breath. Whew, we're getting deep here. Okay, next, Debbie has you do the exact opposite. You imagine getting into an elevator and pressing up. Again, I pressed 7. Once you arrive, you're asked to imagine your happy place, somewhere that feels safe and soothing, somewhere you can rest and relax and be at peace. Here you will meet your highest self, or a more actualized version of you, one that embodies who you desire to become more of. Once I got off the elevator, I was immediately in a beautiful, lush Zen garden, full of trees and exotic flowers. Butterflies were floating by, and relaxing fountains were trickling, and there were benches to sit on. This garden was on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and the view was breathtaking. I could hear birds chirping, there was a slight breeze flowing through the trees, and the ocean waves below were crashing onto the beach. And then I saw her. Me, my higher self. She was radiant. I mean, she was literally glowing and lit from within. She was walking through the garden picking flowers. She had long golden blonde hair cascading down her back, full pink lips, sparkling crystal clear blue eyes, and she looked healthy and toned. She was wearing red satin pants and a kimono top. Her feet were bare and she walked with purpose. Confidence oozed out of her. She had a slight smile on her lips and seemed to be at peace. Her energy was both electric and grounded. I was drawn to her like a magnet. She looked over at me, smiled, and waved me over. I walked to her and she handed me a flower. She didn't speak to me with words, but I could feel from her pure love, joy, and acceptance. I heard the words, "I adore you," and started to cry, both in my vision and in real life. She leaned in, kissed the tears from my cheek, hugged me tight, and then looked me square in the eyes. I knew from her smile that all was well and that I was safe. I smiled back at her through a flood of tears, and she squeezed my hands and walked away. After I arrived back from the elevator, I journaled out pages and pages of my experience with both versions of me. It was intense and super cathartic. So the final exercise that I powered through that night was the integration of both the darkest, shadowiest self and the highest self. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was intense, deep shadow excavation, but by far one of the most healing processes that I've ever gone through. Debbie guides you back to the elevator where you hop in and go back up to your happy place. For me, it was that same cliffside Zen garden overlooking the ocean. The doors opened and I stepped right back into the garden. I walked through the path towards one of the benches, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the feral version of me hiding behind some bushes. She was curious about me this time, and I could tell she wanted to connect. I sat on the bench and patted the seat next to me to let her know it was okay for her to join me. She cautiously crept out from the bushes and slowly walked over to me. She sat down on the far end of the bench and stared at me. A short time later, the lady in red version of me walked towards us and took a seat on the bench on my other side. She smiled at us both and then grabbed my hand. I then used my other hand to try to hold my shadow's hand. Initially, she pulled away, but slowly she allowed me to touch her. There we were, the three versions of me holding hands on this bench in my imaginary happy place. I could feel our collective hearts beating, and eventually the heartbeats synced up as one. And then it started to rain. It was a soft rain at first, and then a true springtime downpour. The lady in red stood up and walked over to a patch of grass. She laid down on it and motioned for us to join her. We did and laid down next to her. The three of us once again grabbed hands and squeezed tight. We all started to cry as the rain washed over us. It washed off the touch of makeup from the lady in red. It washed off all the dirt from my shadow self. And as both of these versions of me were washed clean, they slowly started to dissolve and fade away. I was overcome with a wave of pure love energy, and a huge sob racked through my body. I heard the words, "You are love," and then both of them were gone. After a long time, I returned to the elevator and back to my current now, a sobbing, snotty mess. I'm not sure how long I cried on that couch, or how many pages it took me to journal through that experience. I'm sure I slept most the rest of that weekend. Sometimes I wish I had kept that journal. Other times I'm grateful I didn't. Even sharing these stories now brings up a tangle of emotions. But I'm forever grateful to multidimensional me and the versions I once was. I'm glad that this version of me, here in 2021, had the strength and courage to share this very intimate memory about a very vulnerable experience with you. I know that in sharing my own story, that you might feel even just a little more courageous to dive deep into your own shadow. The beauty of being human is this divine dance between dark and light. We're both and, not this or that. It takes all the colors of the spectrum to make a rainbow, and those colors are all within each of us. So just remember, every time you point your finger out declaring that person is a bleep, 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 that you've got 4 fingers pointing right back at yourself. And that right there just might be a place to love up on and explore your shadow a bit. I hope this episode was of value for you. If you were inspired or moved in some way, please share a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, feel free to send me a message and let me know some of your thoughts. As always, I'll link all of the books and resources discussed in the show notes on the podcast page at camik.com. Thank you so much for sharing your time and space with me today and for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the Cosmic's Innerspace podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or share this episode with a friend. I'd love to stay connected with you. On Instagram, you can find me at camik.com. That's KAMIEK.com, where I share a lot more Cosmic's goodness on Insta stories. And I'm at camik.com on Facebook. And of course, we can always stay connected via the Cosmic's Innerspace Mothership over on the blog at camik.com. Okay, until next time, friend, I'm sending you stardust and so much love.